Welcome to the Asking Why podcast. I'm your host, Clint Davis, and today we have an episode on Alzheimer's and dementia, and we have Laura Gauthier, LPC, CDP, so she'll tell you what all that means shortly, but we met. I was speaking at an Alzheimer's event, and what was that, in the last 6 months, huh?
Yeah, last November.
That's right, and then so we were just talking afterwards, and I was like, man, it'd be awesome. I've never had anybody come on and talk about this stuff, and knowing you're a counselor and work in that particular area, I thought it'd be good for you to come on. And there's a lot of clients that we see, a lot of family members that we see that are trying to help their family member or going through, kind of the early onset of it, and so I thought it'd be great to have you on. So
yeah, I'm excited.
Yeah, awesome. Well, tell us a little bit about you and kind of how you became an LPC, who you are, where you're from, all the background stuff.
Yeah, so when I was going through my master's for my LPC, I worked in a geriatric psychiatrist's office. So kind of just sheer happenstance, I worked in his office and found out that I loved the geriatric population, and then graduated and couldn't find a job because Medicare doesn't pay LPCs. So went the opposite route and became a school counselor for 6 years.
Yeah.
And then the job with the bridge opened up, and it was actually my psychiatrist that I worked for told me about it.
Oh, wow.
And just things fell into place, and I absolutely love what I do, and I'm able to actually counsel and work with families and make a difference in their lives, no matter how small it may be. Mm-hmm. And so you never work a day in your life if you love your job, and I love my job. That's
awesome. It's great to hear in the mental health field too. So you're at the Bridge Alzheimer's and Dementia Resource Center. Mm-hmm. Yep. So shout out to them. I think one of the things I'm always interested in is what made you ultimately want to be a counselor? Like did something happen in your life? Was there a direction or?
Not necessarily. I've always been that person that people always come to ask for advice.
Well, there was the things that happened then.
Yeah. I mean, it's just the little things in life when friends or family or my mom or anything like that, people would come to me and ask me their advice about certain things. And I don't know when it actually went into place of, I want to be a counselor. Mm-hmm. But when I went to undergrad and I was like, I want to do this. I changed my major 4 times in my undergrad and finally landed on psychology. I was like, this is cool, and I enjoy it. Mm-hmm. And then went the counseling route and had to take my GRE twice and freaked out because I had to take it twice. So I was making contingency plans and all that, and then decided to just, this is my plan. This is what God's plan is. Then I need to abide by it and not get freaked out about it.
Yeah. I get that. It's always an interesting. Counseling is such a wide range of things that you can do.
Mm-hmm.
You can do private practice. You can work for Dementia and Alzheimer's Center. You can do school counseling. I mean, there's so many things, at least in Louisiana, that LPCs can do. So yeah, I was just interested in kind of what guided you there. So when you got into practicum, or I guess internship, and you started working with dementia patients, what about that was like the thing that set that apart from everything else?
Because I was able to give them a voice when they didn't have a voice. My coworkers, when I was doing my internship, I did at behavior medicine at Willis-Knighton, and they always kept the intake assessments for the people that either had dementia or the older adults. They always left them for me because I had the patience to sit there and talk with them, or I had the patience to sit there and talk with with the families, because a lot of times you couldn't get all the information from the patient.
Of course.
So you had to call the families and do all that. And there's just something about that population. My mom always said I was an old soul. And so I loved being with the older people, whether it be in life in general or at work. Mm-hmm. So I just gravitated towards them and just loved being able to help them and give that little bit of a voice when they didn't have that voice.
That's awesome. Tell me, and our listeners, what is really the difference between Alzheimer's and dementia? Because I think people get those things confused.
Yes, so they're very much...
Or they call it Alzheimer's.
Old-timers, right? No, so the dementia term is an umbrella term, so like cancer, things like that. Mm-hmm. Dementia is that overall definition. Alzheimer's is a type of dementia. So 60 to 80% of all the cases of dementia are diagnosed as Alzheimer's. Okay. And I can't stand the word, but it's the most popular. It is the one that is most diagnosed. But the other types of dementia are getting more and more, I hate to say popularity, but they're getting more diagnoses.
Okay, so what are those things?
There's Lewy body dementia, which is similar to like Parkinson's. It's a motor skills. Frontotemporal dementia, so temporal lobe, frontal lobe, behaviors, personalities. You've got vascular dementia, so that's going to be like your TIAs, your strokes, proper blood flow in the brain. Huntington's disease has a type of dementia. Parkinson's has a type of dementia. Mixed dementia, so not bad enough you get one, you get two.
Right.
And that's usually like Alzheimer's, frontotemporal, Alzheimer's, vascular dementia, things like that.
Okay, so it's like comorbidity. You have a little bit of both.
Yeah, because they affect the different parts of the brain.
Wow. So Alzheimer's ultimately is something that's like the just popular. Is this kind of like when people say somebody's got autism and it's like everything? Does everybody just dump everything into Alzheimer's?
Sometimes.
Okay.
I mean, for diagnoses, it's a process of elimination. So it's...
Oh, not you, but I just mean like the general population. You said you hate the word. Like,
well, because it's the one that's the most popular.
That's what I mean. Like everybody just kind of throws that out if their parent has something.
Yeah, so they, like if they say they have memory issues, then they automatically kind of interchange that word with dementia and Alzheimer's.
Yes.
Or they say, oh, my mom started out having dementia, but then it turned into Alzheimer's. It didn't really, but it kind of did in a roundabout way. But those in the medical community, those words are very much interchangeable.
Right. So dementia is the umbrella, and Alzheimer's is a type of dementia.
Yes.
Okay. And then those other things you listed are the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. That's super helpful to know, because I think you're right. I think, when there's something in the mental health or physical health world that's a problem, we have these words like OCD is another one, right? Like if you washed your hands twice because you thought your hands were dirty, now you have OCD. Or people are like, well, I'm just OCD about blah, blah, blah. And it's like, look, there's real OCD and then there's just being anal, like there's a big difference. So I think that's important for people to know. What are some of the early, signs that people can look for Alzheimer's in general? But, how do you distinguish that? If you're a person listening and you're like, I have an older parent, they're starting to have some issues, what are some ways that they can like look to see if that's kind of something they need to worry about?
So the most popular question we get is, if I lose my keys, do I have dementia?
Right.
And I tell them, I said, I'm 35 years old and I lose my keys on a daily, weekly basis. So
do you know what your Enneagram is?
I don't.
Oh, yeah, you have to look that up.
I am ADHD to like the 10th degree, so I am organized chaos all the way.
All right, we were laughing this morning. We have a big group that meets our counselors, and we were talking through like our own stuff. And one of my counselors is like a 1 on the Enneagram, which is kind of the A type, and I'm not an A type. And he was making fun of me about like opening like a bag of things with like the bags that come with candy or chips, and they have the thing the Ziploc thing you can close. And so his wife is like I am, will rip the bag but then not tear the whole thing off, and he drives him crazy. But anyway, so just personality, like it's interesting to caretakers, a lot of therapists, a lot of people who take we're not always the most heavily detail oriented people in the world.
Yes.
So I understand completely. All right, so what are some of the like things they can look for if their parent or their grandparent is starting to kind of decline, or they notice some things?
So, I mean, one of the big things is if they are getting lost to places that they've known how to get to, they drive all the time, or they get halfway there, or they get there and then they don't know how to get back home. If they're paying bills either multiple times in a month because they don't remember paying them, or not paying that bill at all and then losing that bill or getting sent over to collections, things like that. If they are having some possible, personality changes, things that aggression, anger, frustration, because their brain is trying to process so many things at once that they can't process it all. So their first reaction is to act out in aggression or anger or lash out. Things that are just not of the norm are things to be on the lookout for. If they are losing things, they generally will put it in a safe place, but then not remember where they put it. And that safe place is in a awkward, random place. We've had clients where their wives put their purses in the pantry because in their mind that is a safe place. And in our everyday mind, they're like, that's strange. Why would you put your purse in there? And that's our first instinct, is to, ask them about it. But they're not going to remember why they put it there. They just wanted to put it in a safe place.
Yeah.
So those awkward random things, or if they're constantly losing things, but they know they've put it up, those are some of the bigger things to look out for.
Yeah. Is there any like verbal processing, like having a hard time finding words or?
Yeah, a lot of people will go through aphasia. So they know the word and they're thinking of the word, but they physically can't get it out. Or they'll say something similar. So if they're wanting a water bottle, they may ask for a glass or a cup or things like that. They'll get that synonym instead of the actual word, because they're just doing that word substitution.
Wow. How long? So is there a typical like time frame for when you start to see that decline to where it's I mean, I don't know what's the proper word, bad or, unmanageable or?
So there's stages of it all.
Okay.
There is it's called the Global Deterioration Scale.
Okay.
So there's 7 different stages, and it really does kind of lay it out for you and gives you like real concrete things to be on the lookout for. There's no really set time for anybody, because every single person that has dementia in general has a different timeline. It could be 5 years. It could be, I've known people to have it for 20 years.
Wow.
So everybody is on their own timeline because everybody's different.
What's the youngest that people get dementia?
There's early onset, so like 40s, 50s.
Wow.
Frontotemporal dementia is in late 40s to early 60s, typically. So that's the one that's in the most popular right now, because Bruce Willis has been diagnosed with it. Wendy Williams, that's the one that's getting the more popular traction, because they are younger and they're getting diagnosed with it. Because most people think Alzheimer's, they think 80s, 90s.
Right.
But the average age of getting diagnosed is 65.
Oh, wow. Yeah, the Bruce Willis thing's been interesting to follow, just, him being such a prominent actor and person in the culture, and, his family's been pretty open with it, which I think has been, what do you think about that? Have you kept up with that? Is that something that's been interesting to you?
Yeah, it's been super interesting, because it's not just an Alzheimer's case. So it gives people a different perspective on a different type of dementia. And like you said, they've been super open about it. And they've said about he had what they thought was the aphasia first. And then it slowly turned in, they re-diagnosed him with the frontotemporal. So just the fact that he's they're open, that he's no longer able to speak and do these certain things is pretty profound, because they could be very private with it.
Well,
but
yeah.
The fact that they're open about it is really great.
Yeah, it's always such a fine line for people that are in the public eye to, share to help other people so they can normalize some things and get the information out and kind of raise awareness. And also they're giving up, a lot of private information. So.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Or making it like hysteria about something and not good. So it's been,
Yeah.
I've enjoyed, unfortunately watching and learning and kind of asking questions and seeing people's comments, and, how many people get on there and, they'll do a post or, on the news or on Instagram or whatever. And, just a lot of people going, oh, this is exactly what I'm going through. It's almost like group therapy, which has been very helpful. What do we know are the kind of early causes of dementia, Alzheimer's, these things?
So there's no real like one root cause, but they are saying that they are finding, so like the plaques and the tangles, the evidence is in their brain 30 years before the first symptoms start.
Tell me what plaques and tangles are.
So that is the, for lack of a better term, the gunk in your brain that's not getting cleaned out. So that's what is getting your brain kind of bogged down and what is deteriorating that part of the brain.
Okay. And how does that get there?
Not eating well, not proper sleep. So they say, 7 to 8 hours of sleep is good for your brain and for heart health, because it, quote unquote, washes your brain. So, if you don't get enough sleep, then you have brain fog, you're angry, you're irritated, you're just in a weird funk the next day. Well, your brain didn't have enough time to kind of clean itself out.
Yeah.
Then if over time, if you don't get enough sleep, then that you have a culmination of those plaques and that tangles in your brain. And you think of the plaque, so like the plaque that's in like your arteries and your heart, it's the same thing with your brain.
Got
so
it.
it just kind of bunches up until...
And that causes a stroke, a heart attack,
Exactly.
dementia. Okay. Yeah, so we're basically killing ourselves by eating and drinking ourselves into oblivion.
Yeah.
So how much is that? How much has dementia increased in the last 50 years?
Tremendously.
Okay.
So as it sits right now, 7 million cases of Alzheimer's.
Wow.
By 2050, that number is going to double. And I mean, it's because we're living longer. Modern medicine has been amazing. I mean, I have a great aunt that's 100 years old and still as sharp as a tack. So it really depends on how you treat your body, how we take care of ourselves, how you take care of your illnesses, your heart disease, your cholesterol, your blood sugar. If you're taking care of those things now, then that is going to help reduce your risk later on.
Yeah. Do you have, what's your kind of spiritual background, religious background? How does that play into what you do?
So it does play into somewhat. I mean, we are not, at the Bridge, we're not going to not say anything. We're very open about God and religion and all of that. I mean, I grew up Baptist.
Okay.
So we are a culmination of Baptist, Catholic, Presbyterian, all the above at our office.
Okay.
So, but we all believe that we have a huge faith in God, and God doesn't give us more than we can handle.
So do you play that? Do you play that into your, when you look at health and you look at how it's important to take care of yourself? How has that kind of revealed maybe biblical truths to yourself, and to your family? Because to me, it seems like Christ is teaching us to take care of our bodies, and it's the temple. And Alzheimer's and dementia are another, obvious, if you don't eat right, here's another consequence for not doing that.
Yeah, I mean, you definitely, like you said, Christ teaches us to keep our body as a temple, and then we're not doing those things, and we have to abide by those things, because it is for our betterment of our health, of our well-being, but also for your spiritual health. Spiritual health is just as important as your mental health and your physical health.
Yeah, it's so true. Yeah, I think we live in a world where you can fall on two sides of things. You can obviously we don't want people with dementia going, hey, it's your fault because you didn't eat good your whole life, right? Same thing with cancer, same thing with anxiety or depression or any issue. The goal isn't to say, hey, now you're suffering and it's your own fault. But the goal is to look at preventative health and go, hey, these things aren't solely your fault. But there are people who smoke cigarettes every day and don't get cancer.
Exactly.
There are people who eat like trash and they have the best blood pressure on earth.
Yep.
That does happen. But as providers and counselors and, healthcare providers, it's like we have to get back as a culture to teaching people how to prevent a lot of these things instead of, eating and drinking and being merry all the time, and realizing hey, you don't live forever. These things do affect you. In our society, I mean, all of these statistics, like you saying that it's going to double by 2050, that's insane.
Yeah.
But that's the same thing for suicide rate, and it's the same thing for addiction, and the same thing for depression, anxiety. All of these things are just catastrophically escalating. And, I think a big issue of it is how we treat our bodies and how we value, health.
Yeah, because I mean, if you look at it, I think it's 75 years ago, we had 11 preservatives in our food.
Right.
And now we have over 400. And we're an instant gratification society. We are a busy society. We want to do things right here, right now. So running through somewhere is easier than making a home-cooked meal.
Mm-hmm.
So I think a lot of that has to do, we have to slow down as a society and cook at home and be with our families and have that time of just slowing down and being present.
So good.
And not going towards and just not always looking towards the next thing or towards the next day and things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's a really good book called Ruthless Elimination of Hurry. Have you ever heard of that?
I haven't.
And it's by John Mark Comer. I think I've talked about it on here before, but it talks about a lot of that and gives us kind of a view of the Sabbath and taking a day and resting, and the importance of that means that you have to change your entire week to get to that day.
Right.
And so I'm always recommending for people to slow down, eat dinner at the table, but you're right. It's inconvenient, and,
Yeah.
and there's fast food and there's quick and, everybody is focused on sports and focused on, career and focused on keeping our kids entertained. And so nobody has time to, go to Whole Foods and pick something out. And then unfortunately we do have the situation where there are a lot of people who just can't afford to go to Whole Foods.
Right.
Healthy food's expensive.
Extremely.
And that's a sad part of our economic situation in America and where we got into. But there are ways around it, and there are ways to, push back against those things. I think there's a documentary that's coming out about red dye and dyes in foods. I don't know if it's out yet or not, but I've seen it going around. And
don't get me on my soapbox.
Yeah. Well, go ahead. You're on a podcast. I'd love to hear it. Tell me about it.
No, I'm that person that about red dye. I worked in, the school system for 6 years. So I had a front row seat of these kids of what they were eating, whether it be a home lunch or a school lunch, and directly seeing the effects of the red dyes and the blues and the yellows and all of that stuff. So it just didn't come into play for myself until I had my daughter 3 years ago.
Ah, okay. So you have a 3-year-old?
Yes.
Is that the one you have?
Yes,
Yeah, okay.
one and only. She is enough.
What's her name?
Evelyn.
Okay, yeah. Tell me about it. I mean, as a therapist, you learn so much about what you thought you knew.
Yes.
And then you have your own kids, and you're like, oh, man. Put
Oh,
my
yeah.
foot in my mouth too many times. Yeah, it's I mean, what we put in our mouths and what we ingest and drink is so significant. And I really do think that it's so normalized that if you stand up against that or you take a different stance, then you're the crazy person in the community for a while.
Right.
But I do think we're leaning into society more now where people are like, okay, things are really jacked up. What is the problem? And
Right.
and it is difficult. We have kids with food allergies. So by God's grace, we haven't been able to eat all of the trash that I grew up eating. Now, had I not had food allergies, I would have done what everybody else is doing. It's not because we're more moral or smart. It's because we've had to. But since we've had to, man, when we insert Skittles or we let them eat one little thing because they've never had it and because their baseline is without it, it's just a nightmare. This was last year at our church. They had some donuts, and my youngest is 7. He's never had a donut. And so because we just don't eat that.
Yeah.
And our other kid has allergies, so we just never, we typically don't just go get something just for him. And so anyway, he was like, can I eat these donuts? And we were like, yeah, you can have some. They're actually safe for you. So he ate one. And then he came in and he had it all over his face. I was like, dude, how many donuts did you have? And he was like, 3. I was like, oh God. So by the afternoon, he's crying, he's mad, he's overwhelmed, he's sugar crashing.
Yeah.
And after 7 years, that was really our first time. I've seen other kids do it, but that was the first time I've ever experienced personally, what happens when kids eat donuts.
Right.
And then I think about, schools and teachers and people get up in the morning. They let their kids have, Pop-Tarts or, sugar cereal or whatever.
Yeah.
They get to school, they get another snack, that's usually fruit roll-up or sugar of whatever kind. Some people let their kids have coffee, which is insane, and then they drink a sugary drink, and then they're in their class getting in trouble at 7:45 or 8 o'clock, especially boys. And it's like, what did you expect to happen?
Right.
And then after lunch, they're exhausted and tired and don't want to finish out the day. And it's like, man, we are doing them a disservice. And then, as LPCs, then we have, they're ADHD or they're ODD or they have these behavioral problems that they get marked down with. It's like, no, they literally have been fed so much sugar and so much dye and so much stimulant and probably watch screens, half the time as well.
Exactly.
And now we're wondering why they're misbehaving.
Yeah, it's pretty profound when you look at it that way. And I get some people don't have that luxury of making things at home, but sometimes making those better decisions or getting something that is, organic or things of that nature is a better route because nobody's perfect.
No.
I mean, we all, I live by and even I tell my clients the 80-20.
Right.
80% of the time doing good, 20% of the time having the really good foods that you want.
Absolutely.
But, at least doing it 80% of the time is going to be better for your body than doing it 100% of the time or doing those bad stuff 100% of the time.
That's so good. Yeah, because, one of the things I find is that people get overwhelmed with trying to do it perfect, so they do it 30% of the time.
Right.
It's like all of us go, oh, man, this is a lot. It's really hard to cook, and I'll stay with it for a while, but I've got to do it, all the time, and then I fail, and then I give up. Instead of being like, no, I can I can have a good relationship with food, and I can eat things that I want to eat. I just have to be moderate, and I have to have some self-control. And I mean, ultimately, I have to know what's going on in my heart and my emotions that make me want to do these things and be impulsive, and what they're feeding. And,
Exactly.
So there's so much to do with it that I mean, I think that's why we counsel people, is to help them unpack like why we do what we do.
Yeah, exactly.
And unfortunately, we're not that unique. At the end of the day, we all have trauma. We all have experiences. We mom and dad heard all the things we talk about on here all the time. And yet when they're in my office, I mean, if they tell me this symptom, it's like, well, there's a root cause to this. We got to look at that thing. And I love that we're in a culture more so now that, kids' behavior is, we're tracing it back down to a symptom and going, okay, well, let's cut this stuff out, or, let's minimize this, or how much screen time. It's like, well, they watch, 2 hours a night of a movie, and then they play Nintendo, it's like 1980s kid. They play whatever they play, PlayStation, Xbox, until, I don't know. And it's like, okay, well, let's start with minimizing some of that, and, don't rip it all out, but let's lower it a little bit,
Yeah, I mean, there's the small changes can make a huge difference. And that's what I tell all of my clients too. Like, doing those, don't just try, if I give you 10 things to change in your life, don't do them all at once.
Right.
Because you're going to fail immensely. Mm-hmm. Do one, get really good at it, and then add in another one. One of the random things that you can do to reduce your risk, floss your teeth.
Wow.
Because they are finding the bacteria in your teeth, that it's going to your brain and to your heart. And that's causing like the plaque buildup and things as well in your brain.
All of our dentists are going to be very happy with you.
Right?
That's right.
So if you don't do anything else, floss your teeth.
That's right.
Because you can have beautiful teeth and they still fall out because you get bad gums.
That's right. We have a lot more control over things than we think we do. Mm-hmm. And then we focus on the things that we literally have no control over, and we hyperfixate on those, other people's opinions, what's going to happen to us. And It's like, man, just control the things. Have you drank water today? Have you, gotten any sleep? You were talking about sleep earlier. It's really funny to me that I feel like we're so unhealthy that we're minimizing things. So, for example, and this may be, whatever, offensive to somebody. I'm not trying to make it offensive. But, when we were having our babies, what they would say at the doctor is, formula is awesome because it does these things.
Right. And
if you want to give them better benefits, if you want to increase like whatever, like if you want them to be extra smart, then breastfeed.
Yeah.
But that was kind of how they presented it. Mm-hmm. As if formula is the baseline.
Yeah.
Really what that means is that for thousands of years, we breastfed and kids are this smart. And if you do formula, then they're 3 points less smart.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, on the truth of the situation, like if you look at it as a whole, you're not increasing their smarts because you happen to breastfeed, because you're making formula the norm.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, oh man, I'm not saying that if you, don't breastfeed your kids are going to be dumb. What I'm saying is that we change the standard over time for whatever the product is, or whatever the instant gratification is, or whatever becomes necessary.
Right.
And then people who could breastfeed go, oh, well, formula is the exact same thing because they've told me that, and they don't choose to do that thing. And I say that to say, like sleeping. So you said people need 7 hours of sleep. But for most of history before the alarm clock, the average person got 11 hours of sleep.
Yeah.
So it's like we're already, because we can, saying, look, all you need 7, when in reality, like, we've only been in a world where people are sleeping they're not even sleeping 7 hours.
True.
But now the thing that they need to do, the baseline is 7. Mm-hmm. And so it's like we move this standard of health lower and lower because we're just like, please just do something remotely healthy so that we can keep you alive.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
And so it's like all these companies, right? There are some people who need who need formula, who have to do it. We had to end up switching and doing that because our kids had allergies. It was so much on her body, and we had to find a thing that had proteins already broken down in it. So again, I'm not like saying that you shouldn't do formula or you should or shouldn't. I'm saying when we as a culture make the standard lower, then we lower it for everybody. The thing that we're going for is like, oh, we'll just do the minimal thing so we're okay. And I feel like that's what we're doing with a lot of situations.
Yeah, doing the bare minimum is okay for everybody.
All right, so then we're lowering, but then we're even worse. We're lowering like what historically has been the norm so that people don't feel bad. I mean, ultimately.
Yeah.
They can go, well, I mean, 7 hours of sleep. I got 6.5. That's close to the, what I should get. And it's like, well, you're really like 4 hours. You should really be getting 11 hours of sleep, but we're telling you 7 just so you can function.
Yeah. And then again, everybody is different.
Sure.
So some people need 7, some people need 8. Like in an ideal world, I'd love to get 10 hours of sleep every night. But again, my 3-year-old does not agree with that.
Yeah, I'm not saying I sleep 11 hours. I'm just saying that the reality, though, is research shows that, there are less, I think I read something the other day, it said there are less people that have gold medals than can function with less than 7 hours of sleep. Meaning, like we say these things like, oh, I'm like one of my buddies is a doctor and you know who you are. He's like, he's an ER doctor. So he gets like 4 hours. He's like, I'm fine.
Right.
But we're saying that, but we never really measure functionality, right? It's like millennials love to say they're great at multitasking. And now we've done all this research and what it's showing is that really doing everything at like a 30% level, they're able to do a bunch of things, but they don't even realize that they're not doing them, at a high performance level. They're doing them at, 30,
mediocre.
40. Yes, exactly. But because the whole society is doing that, we're like, oh, okay, that's fine because it's functioning.
Yeah.
So you look at the average teenage girl and you go, okay, she has the same amount of anxiety and cortisol as a person in a psych ward in 1950.
Wow.
Right? So if you think about it, if you took a teenager and you had a time machine and you took the average teenager, not the ones we know that are remotely healthy, but the average teenager, and you took her and you zapped her back to 1950 and you put her in a classroom, it's going to be so glaringly different. And let's say she doesn't have a phone, right? She's not going to be able to function. She's going to be tweaking out and anxious and worried about all these things that don't even exist in this world. And they're going to go, you need psychological help. And they're going to put her in a place to get help. But because almost the majority of teenagers are functioning in that world, we just go, well, that's normal. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And we've got to start asking the question of like, what's healthy, not what's normal.
Right. No, and I completely agree with that because we look at things and like you said, we're so used to it, we've become ingrained into it. And I always tell people, because they always say, well, I'm not normal. Well, what is normal?
Yeah, bring them in.
And I tell them, I said, normal's a setting on a washing machine.
That's right.
I mean, nothing is normal anymore. You have to do what's right for you and what's right for your family. Because it doesn't matter what your friends are doing. It doesn't matter what someone else or what your neighbor's doing. You have to do what's right for you and what's right for your body and in your family.
Absolutely. And the reason I bring all this up is because when it comes to taking care of your family, whether that's breastfeeding or sleeping or dementia care, it's so important for people not to just listen to what everybody else is telling them, but do their own research, take into account their biology, their genetics, and ask good questions.
Yeah.
And I feel like what I want to challenge people on is ask questions. Like, just don't be a lemming and do what everybody else is doing in the culture, because most of what everybody else is doing in the culture is unhealthy. And the standard is so much lower that even what they're telling you is like healthy is lower than what is required.
Right.
And so if we can all just like ask good questions, be in community, see good counselors, go to good doctors, it takes a lot of effort though.
Yeah, you have to be your own advocate.
Yes.
You can't just say, it's just like if you go to the doctor and you get lab work done and they go, oh, you're within the normal range. Well, what specifically is my number? Is it in the low normal, the normal, or the high normal?
Yeah.
So you have to be your own advocate for your health and ask those pertinent questions.
Absolutely. We just had integrative wellness doctor on, and we didn't talk about this, but my wife and I were talking about just the early onset menopause that's going on in females. And, the things that didn't happen to women for 20 more years are already happening in early, late 30s, early 40s, and going, why is this happening in my body? Why are these things changing? And if you go get your labs drawn, you're right. Within the norm, they're going to say nothing's wrong with your
hormones.
Yeah, your hormones. But it's like, but I feel crazy and I'm having all these things happen. And so in certain cases, doctors will say, well, it's in the normal range, so move on, like figure it out.
Right.
And it's like, no, you have to trust your body and know that, something's going on and pursue, a higher level of care.
Yeah, and you look at your doctor and say, if you can't help me, then send me to someone who can.
Absolutely. So in that realm, going back, let's get back to Alzheimer's and dementia. What are some of the things that I say let's get back to it, but I do think that when you're thinking about, as most people that are listening to this don't have anybody in their life who have Alzheimer's and dementia.
Right.
That's just the truth. But you will. Like if
or
these
you know somebody.
Yeah, these statistics are increasing, then what can you do now with your children? They're going to grow to be older people, and they didn't know that they were doing these things to their body as they went. And so these are some ways to prevent. But what are some things that you see with families that are very difficult, as a counselor, and what are some things that you typically are kind of letting them know and helping them when they're dealing with somebody who, has these issues?
So a lot of times it's you've got, say you've got a group of 4 people and you've got 3 people that are agreeing with it. Yes, they've got dementia. Yes, they've got this. You typically will have one outsider and go, they're in complete denial. And so a lot of times we have to bring families in and talk with them and go, look, we're a non-biased person. We take in all the information, and then we're going to, help you make those best decisions. But we try and help that person to understand that they are in denial in a comforting way, but
like, you're in denial.
Yeah. Like, no, you can't do that. But helping them understand that their loved one is going through something, and they understand it, even though if they don't admit it, some unconscious level, they know that something's going on, and that's why they're acting out or getting angry or getting frustrated, things like that. That's one of the big things that we have to work with is we typically have one family member that's in denial or just having trouble understanding and wrapping their head around that their person has dementia and they can't do anything about it.
Yeah, why do you think that is?
Because
I know there's a bunch of reasons, but
typically it's the relationship with that person. It may be like that they are like if it's a dad that has dementia and they're the daughter and it's the daddy's girl and she doesn't want to accept it. It's the whole accepting of the disease. And just because you accept it doesn't mean that person's going to change, but you have to be there for that person while they're going through these changes, because they're still that same person. They just may act a little differently.
And that's something you help people with a lot, is just kind of processing the grief and the guilt and the...
Yes.
Yeah.
So there's a term, it's called ambiguous loss. And a lot of people that are caregivers go through ambiguous loss with a person with dementia because they are grieving the little things throughout their 10, 12, 15-year journey with this dementia. And then they're grieving it all over again when that person dies. But then at the end of it, they don't feel... They're sad that their person is gone, but then they feel... Relief because they're not under that burden anymore. That person is not under that burden of the disease anymore. And so that's one of the things we also help them with too, is with the ambiguous loss, but then with the grief at the end. We just started a grief support group.
Oh, that's awesome.
So because their grief is so different than everybody else's.
What do you think, especially for spouses, what are some of the things that you would, that you see, but that you also recommend for, let's say there's a spouse whose, husband or wife doesn't remember who they are from time to time, and I'm sure that, gets worse or, becomes 100%. But what are some of the things that you recommend for them on how to deal with that?
So if they are just starting out, or if they're kind of in the middle of it, we always tell them that to show pictures and to help with those memories when they first got married and kind of chronologically going through, but also introducing themselves and going, hey, I'm so-and-so, and it may register, it may not. And the thing we always tell people is they may not remember who you are, but they will always remember how you make them feel. And we've had lots of clients that they either think that their husband or wife is their second husband or wife, or that they're just a really good friend that takes care of them because they know that they can trust them and be with them, but they may not remember that connection. Yeah. And a lot of times they don't remember that connection because it may actually be a second marriage. And we always tell people, like, Alzheimer's, dementia in general, their mind is like a bookshelf. and like every 5 years is a shelf. And as someone gets the disease, that bookshelf starts to tip over. So those ones up top are tip over and they go first, but the lower ones stay for a longer period of time. So that second marriage is higher up on a bookshelf than the original marriage, than the first marriage.
Yeah. So it just has to do with short-term and long-term memory?
Yeah, a lot of times it does.
Okay.
And there are other people that they remember their loved ones till the very end. So it's just how the disease is attacking the brain, unfortunately.
Yeah, I'm assuming that the more you can educate a spouse or a kid on that, then the less personal that they take it.
Yes. I mean, and it's always hard to walk in and look at someone. I mean, my grandfather was that way. I walked in, he had no idea who I was.
Sure.
And that was hard because I didn't understand what was going on.
Yeah.
But once that we are able to educate and tell them what's going on, it doesn't necessarily make it easier, but it prepares them a little better for what's going on and how to still communicate and interact with that person.
Yeah, I mean, those things are so difficult. I think whether it's addiction or dementia or any kind of disability, there's such a fine line in our culture of validating people, right? That what they're doing is hard, and that this is, and sitting with them and their stuff, and like, man, this must be so hard for you to have a spouse or a daughter or son, with these issues. It's like we have to hold space for them and validate how hard that is. But then there's got to be this reframe and depersonalization of it, of like, okay, well, but also you don't have it, and this isn't, this isn't about you to some degree. And what I mean by that is, no matter what, we're going to be sad and we're going to have emotions, and we should. But there is, like, I'm sure you deal with this a lot. Maybe I should pose it as a question. Do you find that a person's level of health and their previous level of relationship and health with that person, increases or decreases the crisis that it is?
Yeah. And I mean, so with someone with dementia, their personality traits almost get magnified as the disease progresses. So if they had a tenuous, kind of maybe even stressed relationship before, but now they are the sole caregiver, that stress is going to be that much more. And if there was trauma imposed with that trauma has to be dealt with before you can become a good caregiver.
Can you give me an example?
So there was a father and a daughter, and she, parents were divorced, not a good relationship, and she didn't really have a good relationship with him. But dad was remarried, but stepmom didn't have, she was there, but not all the time. And so she had to then step in and deal with that. And she had to deal with her past issues with her dad. But they didn't really come out until she was put into that caregiver role. And so we kind of helped her, as she was being a caregiver, work through those issues at the same time, so she was able to be a better caregiver for her dad as well.
Yeah, I can imagine that's really difficult. Like, you have a situation where you've got maybe a unhealthy or toxic, on some varying degree parent, and then they get sick, and you're the only person in their life that can take care of them, and you're trying to, take care of them and deal with their anger and their frustration and, all the things that goes with, and yet they're the person who hurt you your whole life and wasn't available for you emotionally.
Right.
And you're there trying to help out. And it's like, yeah, you need to really be every week processing that stuff out and differentiating, and deciding why it is that you're doing this.
Yeah, and I mean, that goes with any caregiver too, because we do caregiver support groups, and it gives them a place to come and vent and be with like-minded and alike community. And they're funny, they're interesting, they're very frustrating at times for the caregivers because they are getting their frustrations out, or they're asking for advice on things that are going on. But you have to have that place to release those emotions, because if you keep them bottled up, you're just going to then resent your person that you're taking care of, and you're going to resent yourself for that resentment later on.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you always want to be sensitive to the people that you're caring for. I mean, even as clinicians, right?
Right.
But there has to be some level of staffing a case and being like, oh my gosh, can you believe this? Like, this is what we're dealing with, without personalizing it to this person's bad or awful.
Right.
Or thinking that we're better. And yeah, I think care groups are so important for people, especially with Alzheimer's and dementia, to be able to go, hey, they did this crazy thing, or they said this funny thing, or they thought I was this person, and be able to kind of laugh about it, and somebody go, oh yeah, they did that to me too. And that go, okay, well, I'm not the only person experiencing this difficulty and hardship, and normalize some of that and laugh about it, or cry about it, or be angry about it, and, and have a community of people who are going through that. Because in our society, most people, they're just uncomfortable with everybody's pain.
Yeah, well, in like dementia in general, people didn't talk about it.
Right.
And so that's always been a hard one. It's a very taboo subject still. And people are still trying to get used to talking about it and opening up in groups.
Why do you think that is? Why that in particular?
I think it's because, 50, 75 years ago, it was hardening of the arteries. Grandma was going senile, and we're just going to put her in the back room and she'll be fine. Mm-hmm. But now you've got so many more prominent people in the community, lawyers, doctors, dentists. I mean, these prominent people that are getting dementia.
Yeah.
They don't want to kind of sullen or make their image less than, and especially if they're a man. They don't want to see appear less than. And
because that makes them look weak.
Yes.
It's so crazy that, like, physical ailments, right? That goes back to what we were talking about earlier, is like this balance of, you can, right, take care of yourself and prevent some diseases, but then sometimes you can do everything that you can do and be healthy and get a disease.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
so there's all this guilt and shame that comes with it. I know I struggle with that a lot. Like, if I'm sick, I have this weird, like, dynamic where, my wife says a lot of guys get man colds. But
Man flu?
I might be, I'll be dying. And she's like, you need to lay down, because I just don't, I have a heart. I'm not saying that's good. I'm saying it comes with, I feel so guilty for being sick. So if I'm in the room, I'm just so anxious about, like, her needing help, or, I'm always like, I'm so sorry, you got to bring me this. She's like, shut up, like, you're dying in here. Like, I'm just bringing you water. But my point is that with illness, with anxiety, with depression, with Alzheimer's, like, it's so interesting that we have this deep shame, around something that we really, we could try to prevent, but we can't really predict if we're going to have to deal with it or not.
Right.
And yeah, I think our culture and society as a whole has a lot of work to do, and is doing some of it to, to hold space for people and not blame them. And, and I think that goes back to, we're all so busy and stressed out and overtaxed that we don't have time to deal with somebody's stuff. And so the easier thing is to go, why'd you eat red dye and now have dementia? It's like, that's the kind of, it's like, oh my gosh, like, it's not that straight line of a thing.
Right. Well, and that is our goal at the bridge too. It's just to educate more and get more information out to the community, so that it's not a taboo subject. We are open and honest, and we do forums all over Northwest Louisiana, so that we can get that information and get that education out there for them.
Well, I think that's huge. You guys are doing amazing work, and it's one of these things that, like you said, there's millions of people that have it. It's going to continue to get worse, unfortunately, barring God doing something crazy. And so that means that you guys are trying to be ahead of all the numbers of people who are going to be dealing with this in the next 20, 30 years, so that our society can handle this better. Because, it's going to be, it is a major problem, but it's going to continue to be a major problem. And so I'm just super thankful for you and what you're doing. And, as a fellow LPC, but also just as a Christ follower, you're doing amazing work in a very small, niche of the world that most people don't know about. Most people never think about. So I just want to encourage you to keep doing what you're doing. And, the people at the bridge, like, that are going to listen to this, like, you guys are doing awesome things. And I just thank you for coming and sharing with our listeners, about this stuff and about how families can help deal with it. And I'll tag resources and all those kind of things to the podcast episode.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Any closing thoughts or anything that we missed that's kind of like, man, that's something I really want them to know, or the people to know?
I think we covered pretty a wide variety of topics, but it's been good.
Yeah. What any resources off the top of your head that people could go to, podcast or anything that just to educate themselves more on if they have a spouse or a family member that's starting to show signs or in the middle of it?
Yeah, there is the Dementia. I think she's the Dementia Care Blazer.
Okay.
She's she's on YouTube. And then we've got a lot of resources and stuff on our website and information. Just if you're unsure or looking, we've got a ton of stuff on our website.
Okay. Do y'all have a social media?
Yes.
What is it?
We've got Facebook and Instagram. So it's just our title is the Bridge Alzheimer's and Dementia Resource Center.
Okay, so it's just at that. Okay,
Yeah.
We'll put it in the show notes.
Okay.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on. And guys, thank you all for listening. If you do have somebody in your life who is struggling with dementia and any of the other lists of things underneath the dementia umbrella, know that there's help. There's support, that you don't have to do the stuff by yourself. There's a lot of counselors in the community and in the community around you. I know not everybody's from Shreveport, but if you need help or support finding somebody in your area, reach out to us and we can connect you with Laura and the Bridge, and they, I'm sure, can look up zip codes and things in your area that can take you to the right people. Man, all of these things, are ultimately just the product of the fall, and a product of sin being in the world and brokenness being in the world. And our hope can't be in, us solving all the world's problems. But we also, at the same time, have an amazing task, of loving one another and being the body of Christ and carrying each other's burdens. And people like Laura and the Bridge, they do that really, really well. And so if you need help, please reach out. Don't be in your house alone. Don't let your emotional scars and issues and damage keep you feeling like you can't ask for help. I know lots of family systems issues are going on. And so if you're trying to take care of a dad or a mom who's been unhealthy or who are just really causing you problems or continuing to be, toxic, get help, get support, because you do not have to fight this battle by yourself. So God bless you. Have a good week, and we'll talk to you soon.